Fog crept through the streets of a French village in 1386, carrying muffled screams and the smell of wet earth. In a dark corner, a small, torn body lies crumpled. Blood stains the straw beneath the fangs of a raging pig that vanished into the night. But this time, the fate won't be a lord's feast or a simple slaughter. In the next morning, the church bell tolls heavy. Villagers rushed forward, clutching trembling candles. In the center of the square, a tall wooden platform, and on it was an iron cage creaking with that very pig inside. In the presence of God and his angels, the judge's voice booms, raising the sword of justice over the animal's head. We are here to try a demonic spirit possessing this vile body. Behind stone pillars, an old woman whispers, "I saw its eyes. They burned like hellfire." Suddenly, the great door swings open with a metallic shriek. In steps the defense attorney, a pale young monk clutching an ancient book. "Your Honor, this creature has no soul to be condemned." But the crowd roars, "It's a criminal. Hang it like a thief." And in the corner, a black cloth hides something. It's the black hen accused of laying cursed eggs. The strangest trial in history is about to begin. Can animals truly be judged like humans? Rats tried in absentia for destroying wheat stores. A wolf exiled from the kingdom for killing sheep, a bee acquitted for lack of evidence. In a time when anything was possible, even the trial of the dead and animals. In the shadows of the Middle Ages, filled with bizarre contradictions, where the line between reason and superstition was nearly non-existent, and justice blurred with brutality, we find one of the strangest legal practices in human history: animal trials. This phenomenon, which today seems like fantasy or fodder for a quirky film, was then a serious reality, meticulously recorded in official court documents as if these creatures had free will and could understand the charges against them. Perhaps humans back then were desperate to make sense of their world and explain disasters, even if it meant hauling an animal to court. Welcome to this fascinating episode about the weird things medieval people did in the Middle Ages. If you're seeking a serene yet stimulating historical tale to transport you to a dreamlike world, you've found the perfect place. Before we embark on our journey through time, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from and what time of day it is for you right now. If you enjoy this kind of relaxing content, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any episodes. In those days before the Renaissance and Enlightenment, when fear of the unknown gripped minds and the church held sway over all aspects of life, it wasn't odd to view any unusual event, whether a child's death by a pig or crops ruined by locusts, as a demonic act or a sign of divine wrath. There was no room in that world for concepts like chance or animal instinct. Everything had a hidden meaning, and every crime needed a culprit, even if that culprit was a cat or a fly. Remarkably, these trials weren't mere fleeting folk rituals, but followed precise legal procedures, like any human criminal case. Animals had defense lawyers, witnesses gave testimony, and judges issued verdicts after deliberation. Some trials lasted months, ending in acquittals, executions, or rarely exile or excommunication. The records left behind offer a fascinating window into the mindset of that era, where law wasn't just a tool for social order, but a weapon against hidden forces believed to threaten the natural order. In the villages of France, Germany, and Switzerland, where most of these trials occurred, people lived in constant fear of a nature they didn't yet understand. Death was ever present, diseases struck without distinction, and famines hit periodically. In such a world, it's no surprise that people sought scapegoats for every calamity, even if that scapegoat was a pig or a cow. Thus, these animals transformed from valuable property into criminals tried publicly, as if this somehow restored justice or balance disrupted by their actions. But how did it come to this? How could medieval humans imagine that an irrational animal could bear legal responsibility for its actions? To answer, we must step back to an era where science hadn't yet separated the physical and spiritual worlds, and the Church taught that everything in the universe had a soul, even animals and plants. In that world, it wasn't strange to believe the devil could possess an animal, driving it to commit crimes. Some theologians even thought animals, like humans, would face judgment on the day of resurrection, so judges gave them swift, earthly trials. What's most astonishing is how seriously these trials were taken. They weren't just symbolic displays to scare the masses, but were executed with full legal rigor. In Savigny, France, in 1457, for example, a pig was tried for killing a child, assigned a lawyer, and tried before a large crowd, ending in its conviction and hanging. Even stranger, its piglets were tried for complicity, but exiled due to insufficient evidence. All this was recorded in court documents as if perfectly normal. In other cases, trials grew more complex. In some Swiss villages, where belief in witchcraft was rampant, black chickens or cats were tried for causing harm through sorcery. In France, a group of rats was tried for destroying wheat crops, and a skilled lawyer defended them, arguing they hadn't received prior warning to leave the fields, thus committing no legal offense. This strange world, where animals were seen as beings with legal rights and duties, may seem like madness or fiction to us today. But it was a natural outcome of an era where the boundaries between human and animal, natural and supernatural, reason and superstition were hazy and easily crossed. In a time when science hadn't yet explained animal instincts and clear laws protecting animal rights didn't exist, it was easy for any animal to become a criminal in the eyes of humans seeking explanations for every evil that befell them. The importance of studying this phenomenon today lies not just in its oddity, but in what it reveals about human nature. In every era, humans seek scapegoats for their troubles, whether an animal in the Middle Ages or a social or ethnic group in later times. These trials, despite their apparent naivety from our modern view, remind us that true justice cannot be achieved when we strip humanity from the other, be it human or animal. Medieval animal trials saw an astonishing variety of creatures, innocent in their instincts, facing human courts. This bizarre phenomenon wasn't limited to one type of animal, but included nearly every creature living alongside humans then, from the largest pigs to the tiniest insects, each according to its alleged crime. At the forefront of these accused animals were pigs, which dominated animal trial records. Their prominence wasn't random, but stemmed from their close ties to medieval human communities. Pigs roamed village streets freely, feeding on scraps and sometimes sharing human homes. This closeness made them witnesses to daily life, but also prime suspects when tragedy struck. Countless pigs found themselves accused of killing a child, simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Historical records preserve dozens of cases where pigs were hanged, some even dressed in human clothes before execution, as if judges wanted to emphasize their full moral responsibility. But pigs weren't alone in the dock. Dogs, humanity's companions since history's dawn, also faced harsh human justice. In Saint-Michel, France, in 1379, a dog was tried for attacking a nobleman and sentenced to death, not by hanging but by burning, as if it were a dangerous criminal. In other cases, dogs faced lesser charges, like stealing food or damaging property, with punishments ranging from whipping to exile from the town. Cows, those gentle creatures central to the medieval agricultural economy, didn't escape human justice either. In a Swiss village in 1621, a cow was tried for witchcraft after villagers believed it caused a child's illness. The trial, lasting days, ended with the cow burned at the stake, showing how fear of the unknown gripped minds then. Some records even mention cows executed for causing agricultural disasters, as if they had supernatural powers. Wild animals also had their share of these bizarre trials. Wolves, which terrified European villages, were sometimes tried in absentia, with sentences of exile or death if caught. In some areas, symbolic trials were held for wolves that attacked livestock, where villagers gathered wolf skulls, tried them ritually, then burned or hung them on town walls as warnings to other wolves. The strangest trials were those of insects and rodents. Rats, those small creatures threatening grain stores, repeatedly found themselves in the dock. In one of the most famous cases in Autumn, France, in 1522, a group of rats was tried for destroying barley crops. The trial, lasting months, saw a lawyer appointed to defend the rats, who argued they hadn't received prior notice to leave the fields. Despite efforts, the rats were sentenced to exile, given a deadline to leave. Locusts, that ancient agricultural plague, were also victims of these odd trials. In some regions, the church held formal trials for locusts, issuing orders for them to leave. In a recorded Swiss case, locusts were tried for crop destruction, and the trial ended with a ruling granting them a plot of land away from human crops. Birds weren't spared this strange justice. Black roosters and hens were tried for witchcraft and sorcery. In one French village, a rooster was executed for laying an egg, a rare but scientifically possible phenomenon believed to be usable in black magic. Other birds were tried for making demonic sounds or causing diseases. Even tiny insects didn't escape this judicial hysteria. In Saint-Julien, France, grape beetles were tried for destroying vineyards. The trial, lasting years, ended with a ruling granting the beetles their own land, away from the villagers' vines. In other cases, worms were tried for ruining crops. Remarkably, these trials weren't mere passing folk rituals, but followed precise legal procedures. Each animal had a defense lawyer, witnesses were heard, and judges issued verdicts after deliberation. Some trials ended in acquittals, especially when lawyers proved the animal lacked criminal intent. But most verdicts were harsh, ranging from hanging to burning. This vast variety of tried animals raises a key question. Why all this effort to judge creatures that can't reason? The answer lies in the medieval mindset, which saw no fundamental difference between human and animal moral responsibility. In a world believing the devil could possess any creature and that animals had free will like humans, it wasn't odd to try them as humans were tried. But behind these strange trials, we glimpse a poignant human thread. Medieval people, despite what we might call naivety or superstition today, were trying in their own way to establish justice in a world full of dangers, famines, and diseases. They sought explanations for their misfortunes and ways to regain control over a world that often seemed beyond control. Medieval records preserve accounts of animal trials that spark wonder and disbelief. where innocent creatures stood before human judges to hear their fates. Among thousands of cases documented by ecclesiastical and civil courts across Europe, some trials stand out as icons of this bizarre phenomenon, preserved as testaments to that strange era's mindset. In Valence, France, in 1386, a scandal shook the region when a pig attacked and tore apart an infant. The enraged villagers didn't settle for slaughtering the animal, but brought it to a formal trial. The investigation was conducted with utmost seriousness, with judges hearing eyewitnesses and examining the victim's body. The court issued its historic verdict. The pig was to be hanged. But the execution wasn't ordinary. The pig was dressed in human clothes and led to the gallows before a large crowd. City archives note the execution used a special animal gallows, costing the town a hefty sum paid by farmers as a special tax. This wasn't unique. In Savigny, in 1457, another pig was tried for killing a child, along with 6 of its piglets for complicity. After a long trial, the mother was executed, while the piglets were exiled for lack of evidence. In the world of rodents, the trial of Autumn's rats in 1522 stands as one of history's oddest legal cases. When swarms of rats ravaged the town's fields and destroyed crops, villagers turned to the courts. A skilled lawyer was appointed to defend the rats, arguing they hadn't received formal notice to leave the fields before the lawsuit. The trial lasted months and ended with a bizarre ruling. The rats were given a deadline to leave or face extermination. Records suggest some rats left, but most stayed, forcing villagers to act on their threat. In the insect world, the trial of Saint-Julian's grape beetles in 1546 remains one of the most complex cases. When beetle swarms destroyed the town's vineyards, residents filed a lawsuit. The trial, lasting years, saw intricate legal arguments from both sides. It ended in a compromise. The court allocated a plot of land for the beetles, away from the vines, with a warning not to return. Strangely, records note a decline in beetle numbers after the ruling, reinforcing locals' belief in the judicial process's effectiveness. In Switzerland, a unique case in 1474 saw a rooster tried for laying an egg. At the time, people believed roosters laying eggs, a rare but possible phenomenon, produced eggs used in black magic. After a bizarre trial involving experts examining the egg, the rooster was sentenced to be burned with the egg before a large crowd. In Lausanne, Switzerland, a church court in 1451 recorded a curious case involving silkworms. When silk production failed, silkworms were accused of deliberately underproducing cocoons. After hearing testimony from silk farmers, the court ordered the worms to leave within 3 days. Records note the worms didn't comply, forcing locals to seek other solutions. In the bird world, records mention a trial of sparrows in Italy in 1519 for damaging crops. The ecclesiastical court issued a verdict of excommunication against the sparrows, ordering their expulsion. Oddly, the judges cited Bible verses about casting out evil spirits to support their ruling. In Germany, a 1499 case involved a wolf accused of killing several people. The wolf was captured and presented in court, where judges heard survivors' testimonies. The bizarre verdict stripped the wolf of its natural rights, before executing it brutally before the public as a warning to other wolves. In France, a black hen was tried in 1471 for witchcraft, after villagers believed it caused a mysterious illness. The trial, lasting days, included an investigation with experts examining the hen. It ended with the hen's conviction and burning. with its eggs confiscated as tainted by sorcery. In England, a unique 1566 case saw a dog tried for causing an elderly woman's death. The accusation claimed the dog's sudden barking caused her to fall and die. After hearing eyewitnesses, the court issued an unprecedented ruling. The dog was exiled from the kingdom, with its breed banned from the town forever. These bizarre trials, despite their apparent naivety today, were conducted with full seriousness and legal procedures. Preserved records show some lasted months, with witnesses summoned, evidence examined, and complex legal arguments presented. In many cases, lawyers were appointed to defend animals, earnestly attempting to prove their client's innocence using complex legal and religious arguments. Remarkably, some trials ended in acquittals. In one French village, a cow accused of causing an accident was cleared because the court was convinced it acted on instinct. In another case, a trial of rats was dismissed after their lawyer proved they hadn't been properly notified of the lawsuit. These documented historical events offer a fascinating glimpse into the medieval mindset, where law wasn't just a tool for regulating human relations, but also a means to combat hidden forces people believed threatened their existence. In a world where death was ever present, and diseases and disasters struck without warning, it's unsurprising that people sought scapegoats, even if that scapegoat was an innocent pig or a hapless hen. The legal procedures for animal trials in the Middle Ages were remarkably complex and organized, far exceeding what one might imagine upon first hearing of these bizarre practices. These trials weren't mere theatrical displays or fleeting folk rituals, but followed comprehensive legal systems, from the moment of the animal's arrest to the execution of the final verdict, encompassing all stages of investigation and trial. Initially, when a crime was suspected to involve an animal, a formal investigation began. For instance, if a pig attacked a human, eyewitnesses were summoned, the victim's body, if the crime was fatal, was examined, and all details were meticulously recorded in court documents. The investigation had to establish that the animal was the sole perpetrator, without incitement from its owner or anyone else. In some cases, animals were acquitted if it was proven their owner deliberately provoked them or neglected their care. Once the investigation was complete, formal trial procedures commenced. The first step was appointing a defense lawyer for the accused animal. Yes, animals had lawyers, often clergy or legal scholars well versed in ecclesiastical and civil law. These lawyers had the right to review evidence, question witnesses, and present legal defenses on behalf of their animal clients. Historical records note that some lawyers offered brilliant defenses, like the attorney for the Rats of Autumn, who argued his clients hadn't received formal notice before the lawsuit. The court's composition varied depending on the crime and location. For crimes against humans, such as murder or assault, civil courts were typically responsible, comprising a professional judge and a jury of local residents. For crimes involving crop damage or natural disasters, ecclesiastical courts intervened, as such acts were seen as signs of divine wrath or demonic interference. During trial sessions, strict procedures were followed. Witnesses were summoned and questioned under oath. Physical evidence was examined, and both prosecution and defense presented arguments. In some cases, the accused animal was brought to the courtroom, where its behavior and reactions were scrutinized. Some records note judges interpreted animal actions, like barking or hissing, as confessions of guilt or evidence of a demonic nature. After arguments concluded, the court began deliberations, which could take days or even weeks in complex cases. Judges relied on an intricate blend of civil laws, ecclesiastical teachings, and local customs. In some regions, there were legal precedents, where prior rulings in similar cases were referenced. When the verdict was issued, it was announced publicly, often executed in a public ceremony attended by locals. Verdicts ranged from acquittal to exile or execution. Execution methods varied by animal and crime. Pigs accused of murder were typically hanged, while animals charged with witchcraft or causing natural disasters were often burned. In rare cases, animals faced ecclesiastical excommunication, formally expelled from the church's fold. Curiously, some trials ended with peculiar punishments. In cases of crop-destroying insects, rulings sometimes granted them land away from human fields. In others, owners were ordered to pay compensation to victims. Some records even mention confiscating animal property, like eggs from hens accused of sorcery or piglets sentenced to exile. Verdict execution was carried out with utmost seriousness. For executions, special gallows or ornate burning stakes were built for animals. These events, often before large crowds, sometimes became near festive occasions. Documents note, executions were costly, with local treasuries covering gallows construction, executioners' fees, and even priests' costs for purification rituals. For exile verdicts, formal procedures ensured animals left the area. In the Autumn Rats case, officials were appointed to monitor compliance, ensuring the rats left within the deadline. In some villages, guards patrolled boundaries to prevent exiled animals' return. Interestingly, these complex legal procedures weren't confined to one region or brief period. Historical records show animal trials persisted for centuries across Europe, from France to Switzerland, Germany to Italy. Each region developed its own legal traditions for these trials, with slight procedural variations. Despite their strangeness from our modern perspective, these practices reveal how seriously medieval people took justice, even when the accused weren't human. They genuinely believed these trials were essential to maintain social order, protect against evil, and appease divine forces. All these intricate procedures, from investigation to trial to execution, aimed to achieve these goals. Animal trials in the Middle Ages were a complex phenomenon embodying the intersection of religious, philosophical, and legal thought in that era. Religiously, these practices stemmed from unique interpretations of sacred texts and theological traditions that viewed the natural world through a purely spiritual lens. In medieval Christian thought, dominant in Europe then, a holistic view of creation held that all creatures, including animals, were part of the divine cosmic plan, thus potentially morally accountable to the Creator. This perspective was rooted in interpretations of biblical passages addressing animal responsibility, such as Exodus's rule that an ox killing a human must be killed. The idea that animals could be tools of divine punishment or embodiments of demonic forces was deeply ingrained in the era's religious mindset. Many medieval clergy believed the devil could possess an animal, driving it to evil, so trying and executing it was seen as a form of exorcism and societal purification. Philosophically, these trials were influenced by the Aristotelian tradition, rediscovered in Europe through Arabic and Jewish translations. The notion that animals possessed some degree of reason and will, albeit lesser than humans, made it conceivable they could be responsible for their actions. The naturalist school of philosophy, prevalent in European universities then, viewed every being as having a natural place and function in the great chain of being, and any deviation from this order required correction, possibly through punishment. Theologically, there was significant debate among scholars about animals' nature and moral responsibility. Some, influenced by St. Augustine, argued animals lacked immortal souls, and thus couldn't be fully morally accountable. Others believed animals had a sensitive soul, enabling limited choice between good and evil. This debate influenced trial variations across regions, with some courts treating animals as fully responsible and others as tools of hidden forces needing purification. The doctrine of divine providence also played a key role. Medieval people believed God directly intervened in worldly affairs, and any unusual event, animal attack or natural disaster, had a divine meaning or message. Animal trials were thus seen as a way to interpret these messages and appease divine justice. Executing an accused animal wasn't just punishment, but a religious ritual to restore balance disrupted by the crime, showcasing divine force's triumph over evil. From a religious anthropological perspective, these trials can be understood as purificatory rituals, protecting society from chaotic forces threatening its order. In a world where death was omnipresent and diseases and disasters struck unpredictably, it's unsurprising people sought symbolic ways to regain control over a seemingly uncontrollable world. Animal trials were one such method, with the accused animal becoming a scapegoat bearing the community's sins, offered as a sacrifice to restore order and harmony. Ethically, these practices reflected a unique view of humanity's relationship with nature. While ancient philosophies saw humans as part of nature, the Middle Ages began crystallizing the idea that humans were nature's masters, per Genesis's divine mandate. This hierarchical view of creation made it conceivable for higher beings to judge lower ones, expressing divine justice through human authority. In the broader cultural context, animal trials were part of a complex symbolic system linking the visible and invisible worlds. In an era where the boundaries between natural and supernatural were blurred, it wasn't odd to attribute animal actions to hidden forces or use trials to communicate with and control these forces. Executing an accused animal wasn't just a physical punishment, but a symbolic act to redraw boundaries between order and chaos, sacred and profane. Ultimately, this phenomenon was the product of a medieval worldview blending entrenched religious beliefs, emerging philosophical concepts, and pressing social needs. In a world where religion dominated all life, philosophy sought rational explanations for natural phenomena, and society desperately needed ways to maintain order. Animal trials weren't mere historical oddities, but serious attempts to understand and manage the world with the intellectual and institutional tools available then. Medieval animal trials raise critical questions today that challenge their validity. It's hard for the modern mind to accept trying non-rational beings as if they possessed free will and the ability to distinguish between good and evil. This concept, acceptable in its historical context, now seems absurd, clashing with basic principles of justice and logic. The primary critique stems from animals' nature. Modern biology unequivocally shows animals act on instinct, without moral or legal comprehension. How, then, could a creature lacking sufficient consciousness to understand charges, defend itself, or grasp consequences be tried? This fundamental contradiction renders these trials mere judicial theater, devoid of true legal substance. Legally, these practices conflict with the principle of criminal responsibility, requiring intent, reason, and will. Modern law clearly distinguishes between voluntary and involuntary acts, a distinction absent in the Middle Ages. Trying an animal for a crime is akin to trying a knife used in a murder. Conflating tool with agent, means with ends. Humanistically, these trials reveal a condescending view toward nature and non-human beings. They turned animals from victims of human ignorance into criminals, from powerless creatures into threats to be eradicated. This reflects humanity's deep-seated urge to blame the other, even a weaker being, rather than face the real causes of problems. Practically, these trials wasted time and resources. Instead of seeking scientific or practical solutions to issues like animal attacks or crop damage, societies resorted to complex legal proceedings that didn't address root causes. How much time, effort, and money was squandered on fruitless trials when those resources could have improved living conditions or prevented risks? Ethically, these trials' harsh punishments, execution or burning, were disproportionate for non-rational beings. Executing an animal that doesn't understand its punishment is a form of cruelty, contradicting any humane ethical principle, even those of the Middle Ages. Religiously, these practices distorted true concepts of responsibility and divine justice. True religion cannot mandate trying creatures not created with the free will needed for accountability. Holding animals morally responsible misrepresents humanity's cosmic role and the creator-creature relationship. In terms of legal thought's evolution, these trials represent a primitive stage where law, magic, and religion were conflated. Instead of serving justice among humans, law became a tool to fight hidden forces and explain natural events through a superstitious lens, hindering true legal thought's development for centuries. Socially, these trials often served to vent collective anger and distract the masses from real issues. Rather than addressing poverty, disease, or mismanagement, attention was diverted to a visible, easy enemy to blame, an unethical and unjust psychological mechanism. Logically, these practices lack basic causality principles. Accusing an animal of causing an agricultural disaster ignores real natural factors like climate change or poor farming. It's primitive magical logic seeking simple explanations for complex events without scientific or realistic basis. Educationally, these practices taught generations that fear and superstition were the basis for understanding the world, not reason, observation, or experimentation. This culture entrenched ignorance and suppressed rational inquiry, prolonging Europe's scientific backwardness for centuries. The deepest humanistic critique is that these trials reflect a failure to empathize with non-human beings. Instead of seeing animals as creatures needing care and protection, they were turned into scapegoats for every calamity. This lacks the compassion and empathy essential to any true human society. Economically, these trials harmed people's interests. Executing a productive animal like a cow or pig meant losing a vital source of food and income. A clear contradiction between practical needs and dogmatic practices ignoring material consequences. Philosophically, these trials mark a regression in rational thought. While ancient civilizations developed more advanced legal and scientific concepts, medieval Europe revived magical and superstitious approaches to nature, a step backward in human thought's progress. Symbolically, these trials reflect humanity's deep fear of nature and inability to understand or control it. Instead of studying natural laws and adapting, humans preferred to try nature, attempting to subdue it through legal and religious rituals, an adversarial stance with severe environmental and human consequences. Procedurally, these trials lacked minimal justice standards. How can a trial be fair when one party can't comprehend proceedings, defend itself, or even realize it's on trial. These are sham trials missing the basic condition of any true judicial process: equality between parties. Historically, these trials were tied to a specific social and religious context, never reflecting true justice or legal wisdom. They're merely a link in a long chain of bizarre practices from the Dark Ages, no longer acceptable in today's world. Even today, with all our scientific and legal progress, the idea of judging animals still exists in different forms. It's not the same as it was in the Middle Ages, when people put animals on trial like they were humans. Back then, animals were blamed for things they did, as if they could understand right and wrong. That idea hasn't completely gone away. Instead, it has changed to fit modern ways of thinking. Legal changes for animals. In some places, people are trying to give animals special legal rights, so they're not just seen as property. For example, in 2014, a court in New York said a chimpanzee could have some legal rights, though it wasn't treated exactly like a human. This case made people think deeply about what animals are and how they fit into human laws. In 2016, Argentina went further and said an orangutan had the right to be free because it was a non-human person with basic rights. These examples show that some countries are starting to see animals as more than just things. Religious and cultural practices. In some parts of the world, old traditions still carry echoes of animal trials. In places like Nepal and India, people hold ceremonies where animals are scolded as part of rituals to bring good harvests or avoid disasters. These aren't official trials like in the past, but they mix the idea of blaming animals with beliefs about nature and spiritual forces. In some African tribes, people believe animals can carry evil spirits, so they might kill them in a cleansing ritual to protect the community. These practices show how old ideas about animals and justice still linger. Animals in stories and art. The idea of judging animals has also become a topic in books, plays, and movies. For example, in 2018, a play in London called The Pig Trial retold an old animal trial in a funny way to show how silly those practices were. Many modern stories and films use the idea of animal trials to talk about problems in human justice systems, or to explore how humans connect with nature. These creative works help people think about the past and question how we treat animals today. Animal rights movements. Today, people who care about animals sometimes act like they're putting animals on trial in a new way. Instead of blaming the animals, they show proof of how animals suffer in places like factory farms or science labs. They ask society to hold the people who harm animals accountable. These efforts are very different from old animal trials, but they share the idea that animals deserve respect and protection, not just punishment. Rural traditions. In some faraway villages, people still hold informal trials for animals. For example, in mountainous areas of Eastern Europe, communities might decide what to do with wolves that attack their livestock. These aren't official court cases, but they show how people still mix human ideas of justice with their relationship to nature. These practices remind us that old ways of thinking about animals can still exist in small, isolated places. Why people judge animals. Scientists who study human behavior say we sometimes give animals human-like qualities, like thinking they can be good or bad. This is called anthropomorphism. It helps explain why people still blame animals for things like attacking, even though it's just their natural behavior. For example, when a bear attacks someone, some people think it's acting mean or evil, not just following its instincts. This way of thinking makes it hard for some to accept that animals don't think like humans. Modern laws about animals. Today's laws focus on protecting animals, not punishing them. There are rules to stop the people from hurting animals, like laws against animal cruelty. But some cases still raise big questions. In 2019, a lawsuit in the United States was filed on behalf of dolphins, asking for their release from a marine park. Most of these cases don't succeed, but they show that people are still debating whether animals should have legal rights like humans. Technology and new questions. New technology, like artificial intelligence and robots, is bringing up similar questions about responsibility. If a robot does something wrong, like causing an accident, can it be tried like an animal was in the past? This idea feels like a modern version of animal trials, even though it's about machines, not living creatures. It shows how the question of who or what can be held accountable keeps coming up. Education and misunderstandings. In some schools, old stories about animal trials are taught without explaining why they were wrong. This can make kids think animals can act like humans, which isn't true. Updating school lessons to include modern science about animal behavior is important. It helps people understand that animals don't have the same sense of right and wrong as humans do. Science and animal behavior. Veterinarians and animal scientists have learned a lot about animals. They know animals don't understand laws or morals like humans do, but they do have complex feelings and social lives. For example, elephants mourn their dead, and dogs form strong bonds with their owners. This new knowledge makes us think about how we should treat animals and what kind of laws we need to protect them fairly. Lessons from animal trials. The animal trials of the Middle Ages were strange, but they teach us important lessons about human history and justice. They show how fear and ignorance can twist laws into something unfair. Back then, when people didn't understand science and faced problems like plagues or famines, they blamed animals to feel in control. This reminds us that laws can become tools of fear if they're not based on reason. Another lesson is about mixing religion and law. Animal trials often came from religious ideas about sin, but they confused natural animal behavior with human crimes. This shows why it's important to keep religion and law separate to avoid unfair judgments. The trials also show how easy it is to blame the weak. Animals were easy targets because they couldn't defend themselves. This same problem happens today when people blame certain groups for big problems instead of looking at the real causes. Another big lesson is about fairness. Animal trials weren't fair because animals couldn't understand the rules or defend themselves. This reminds us that true justice requires everyone to have a fair chance to be heard, whether it's a human, an animal, or even a robot in the future. The trials also teach us that what seems right in one time can seem cruel or foolish later. This makes us wonder what future generations will think of our laws and actions today. It's a reminder to keep questioning our ideas about right and wrong. Finally, the trials show how humans have often seen nature as an enemy. By blaming animals for things like crop failures, people created a divide between themselves and the natural world. Today, as we face environmental problems like climate change, we see how harmful that divide can be. The power of science has helped us move away from blaming animals. By learning how animals think and act, we've realized they don't deserve punishment for being themselves. This shows how important science and education are for creating fair laws and a better world. The role of leaders. animal trials were often supported by powerful leaders, like judges or religious officials. This shows how those in charge can make bad ideas seem normal if they don't question them. Leaders today need to think carefully and avoid letting fear or old beliefs guide their decisions. The future of justice animal trials are a reminder that progress takes time. They didn't stop all at once. They faded slowly as people learned more about the world. This teaches us to be patient when trying to change unfair practices today, whether they are about animals, people, or the environment. In the end, the story of animal trials shows how far we've come in understanding justice and nature. It's a reminder that true progress isn't just about building better technology or gaining wealth. It's about treating all living things with fairness and kindness. By learning from the past, we can build a world where justice includes everyone, human or not. This version simplifies the language to make it accessible for a lower reading level, while expanding explanations to keep the length similar or longer. Let me know if you'd like further adjustments.